In WG live chat, there seemed to be a thing about Western individualism versus groupism. So there are in my personal notation / nomenclature, there is 2 to 4 quadrants here. There is positive and negative individualism. Negative would be hoarding when other people need resources, things like that. And there are positive and negative groupism. And I can go into details in a different video, but that's just this little sort of semi-response to that live chat forum section of the NWG the other day. Anyway, that's by the by. That's just a little side note for a different vlog, YT video. So this one's about Western swords as a sort of metaphor for Western traditional culture, TWC. You know, as we know, right? Like Lord of the Rings and etc. etc. So Inverary Castle in Ray, some kind of, it's something like that in Scotland, right? And it's got an arms hall, with Western arms, right? Great Hall, whatever you call. Let's say Great Hall / Arms Hall in the Inverary Castle. Which I'm probably spelling wrong, but it's very, very similar. It's got the arms hole full of Western weapons. The point is, a bit like Alan Watts says, right? How in the way that, say, a Tai Chi sword or a Kung Fu sword or samurai armor or sword, right, looks sort of semi or quasi exotic, right, from a Western perspective. Why is it impossible to see, and maybe Easterners that practice HEMA could shed light on it too, because they might see the HEMA as exotic from their point of view. Why does it seem from the Western POV, from the Western angle of view? And it's probably to do with like a sort of metaphysical short-sightedness. Why is it very hard to see your own culture? And I don't want to use the word boring, but when, like, for example, you live near a bus station or a coach station, and the things go past every time and you don't notice it. So with TWC, why, you don't notice the way, maybe unless you are a very someone who is very high level tourist or whatever, who can understand the contrast. But why is it that generally Western traditional culture, TWC, you traditional Western culture can't notice itself in the way Alan Watts would say a knife never cuts itself, a candle never burns itself, a light bulb never illuminates itself, something like that, right? And how does something see itself again when it is itself, right? Just like the knife that never cuts itself. So how do you notice, these sort of quirks or exotic aspects of TWC when you're inside it? Again, like short-sightedness, a sort of metaphysics version of it, right? So the Cheshire flag, England, Cheshire, right? I'll write it down so that people know, maybe Americans or anyone watching. Sorry, wrong spelling. It's a county in England. And if you look up the flag, the county flag, okay? It has a straight sword on, right? The classic sort of Western style that everyone's familiar with, okay? With the sort of cross hilt and this and possibly a pommel. I can't remember at the moment. You have to bear with me. I'm just and possibly a sort of fuller or a semi-fuller. Yeah, but it's that sort of classic Western style. It might have a bit of an upturned hilt. Right. Let's just say, for argument's sake, that it has a slightly upturned cross section, cross guard. But it's that classic Western, straight, central, ridge, double edge, this kind of thing, right? And this is pre-medieval, and pre-Christian, because we've got Xiphos Parazonium. Some Celt swords have a proto crossguard. These all have proto crossguards, okay? So why is it, right? Again, it predates Christianity and it predates the Middle Ages, so it's not just a medieval thing, and predates the Western Dark Ages, so-called, okay? Like whatever, 800 to 1100 or whatever, roughly, in the West for the Dark Ages and the medieval period following that, right? Why is it that, what I'm saying is that these proto-crossguards predate all of that, Christianity and Middle Ages, and early Middle Ages, that this is so recognisable, right, as a Western sword or Western style blade, right? Does it come from Greco-Roman? Does it come before? Well, the Gladius Hispanensis is a Celtic blade, not a ancient Roman one, or at least it's influenced by that, so it's not 100% ancient Roman or Greco-Roman. But again, why is that such a recognisable to, I'm sure if you ask most cultures, Western and non-Western, why is that such a typically recognisable Western style blade, right? Again, from a cultural slash internal tourist point of view, something like that, internal tourism, right? Culture studies, civilization studies. Why is it, right, that it never looks at itself internally, or at least the West never does, in terms of like internal philosophy, like the way Eastern philosophy has this extremely developed in Taoism, Hinduism, Chinese philosophy, etc., Indian philosophy as well, and other places, Bhutan and Tibet, that they have this thing of the internal, studying the internal, and Jung and Western psychology is not the same thing, really, right? Why is it that the West is lagging behind in the internal studies, right? And the focus on external might be a reason for that, external canoonships, technology, whatever, for going back for a long time in the Western tradition. So why it doesn't focus on the internal in the same way? And I know people will have people upset in the philosophical community or within Western philosophy that won't like that comment, but I can't not see it. It is true that, the whatever people's problems with Alan Watts are, and I feel like he was an orator and not a guru, in my opinion. But regardless of all that, what the internal investigation, the internal knowledge is so much more advanced, within Eastern philosophy. And again, the only one, at least in the modern Western sphere, is Jung and Western psychology, right? And okay, maybe a tiny bit of other stuff within Western philosophy, but in general, let's just say in general, 90% of it, you might find outliers, like little sects of, a sect of Western philosophy where it does do that, right? But 99.99% of the time, 0.999% of the time, it's not the general sort of average of it, right? So how can something look at itself? Is it impossible? Perhaps. But the point is here, right, is why why is that such a, again, in many cultures, in multiple cultures, when asked, why is that such a, classic or stereotypically recognizable as a Western style blade, right, or a Western sword? with the double edged and this crossguard, right? So again, it predates the Middle Ages, the medieval period. It predates Christianity. So some people say it looks like the cross, and there could be some religious thing to that. That's fine, but as I say, it doesn't really explain pagan crossguards, right? So there's something about, and again, it's not just a say South European thing or a civilized, the Greco-Roman tradition, civilization versus barbarian North Europe. I don't think that explains it either, because some Celtic blades had a proto crossguard also, right? So it doesn't explain this sort of Southern Europe civilization versus North Europe barbarian culture. That doesn't 100% explain it either, And so here is the question, right? Is why? And I suppose I don't know, but it's a very interesting thing to think about. And this Western style sword as an icon, a metaphysical / cultural icon, but also as a thing of like people don't really notice. You wouldn't notice if it was a Western style sword. It's some people might have the MP that it's so-called boring, quote unquote, right? Because you see it every day or whatever, right? And you become used to what you become used to, and that's fine in every culture, right? That's a thing, a universal kind of thing, right? But this, as I say, it extends to Western buildings, and say during the North American colonial sort of say 1700s with the lamps and the red bricks, right? It's very distinctly Western, but it's not really noticed, because it's again like if you live near a train station or a bus station or you live near a railway line. It is not. If it's there all the time, and there's this thing in the Blues Brothers, this film from 1980 where the two brother characters are in the apartment and one says to the other that the trains come by so often you wouldn't even notice them, and it's again to do very very relevant quote from that 1980 film, to do with if you don't really notice your own thing, maybe again unless you're like an absolute expert level ninth dan tourist, then maybe, but on the average level, that 90% of the time it's not noticed. Things aren't noticed. Things don't look at themselves within themselves. So we take this, okay, as a metaphor for sort of TWC and Western sort of traditional culture, traditional Western culture, and we expand on it. So it's not just about the Western style blade or Western sword. It's also, as I say, red brick, all these very specific types of lamps in the 1700s in the sort of North America sort of era, whatever that era we call, but even you compare Chinatown, say, in city centres in the West to with the lion dog and the curves on the lamps, and it's fascinating to notice that normal people don't notice. I'm guessing, but how and the Eastern Asian style with the curves and the pagodas and as I say, their street lamps, at least in the Chinatowns in the West, in my opinion and my observation, seem to have these. But the Western style, again, some people might say it's more plain or more, and some people might say that's because of Christianity. The same with samurai armor, where the demon masks are very, very metaphysical, and the Western medieval armor is a bit more plain or basic, maybe to do with Christianity. Because if you look at ancient Roman cavalry masks and military sort of helmet masks, they had some more ornate designs, possibly due to paganism, right? As well as sort of Eastern European and Russian and Slavic and Northeast Europe, Ukrainian and Estonian things, that these sort of proto medieval helmets, Dark Age sort of things that Western Europe sort of lagged behind because of the so-called Dark Ages. The point is, right, that's a side track. The point is it more plain, and again, is that because of the religion of Christianity versus paganism. I don't know, but how do you notice something that's like under your nose all the time, and how do you appreciate it, and etc. Right? And also appreciating the styles, right? And noticing how it's very specifically Western, right? As in, it's not a pagoda, it's not Asian, and how, again, someone might say, okay, that Victorian or that Georgian from the 1700s in the West, whether it's North America or England or Europe, that lamp is very, basic, or the ironwork, the metalwork is very straight, and it's not decorated the way an Asian style street lamp would be with the curves on it, and I think that's the wrong way to think about it. And again, because of this short-sightedness of not being able to inspect the internal, like the Alan Watts quote, "A knife never cuts itself," something could be missed with that mentality, So maybe there's something to that with people saying, "Oh, Christianity means the designs are more basic or more boring," but I don't think it explains it all. I think you certainly come to appreciate, like in the film, is it Jurassic World 2, I think, 2 or 3, not the first one, and towards the end there is a sort of a Western style mansion house with these stone steps, and some people might say, well, that's not, North European, quote unquote white, whatever that word is meant to be, and I'm not trying to dismiss the word, I'm just saying it's a bit, the way different channels use it is, a bit bizarre at times. But the point is, some people might say that's not North European, South European. It doesn't really matter, the Greco-Roman lineage, whatever. I'm not really interested in getting into these infinite tiny debates, although there's some validity to that north-south kind of thing. Perhaps not. I don't know. How at that film at the end, and there's a sort of farewell scene to the blue raptor name, the raptor named Blue, and there is a stone steps, and there is these sort of, a bit like the movie The Titanic, there is these lanterns, Western style sort of lanterns on these mansion steps to the front entranceway, and again, it's a very specifically Western style. If you watch the film, I think Ghostbusters 2, maybe Ghostbusters 1, but definitely 2, in New York City, there is these, again, just like where my hometown, there is a similarity between that North America and my hometown, and lots of Western places with the stone steps to the museum, right? And then these lanterns, like in the film, right? So again, it's a Western. What's the word? Blind spot? Yes. I'm not saying it's the only culture that does the blind spot with itself, but it's something to do with the West not having this development of internal studies in the way that Eastern philosophy does, okay? In my opinion, and I'm sure people within Western philosophy would get, annoyed at that, and I don't mean it to be that. I really don't. It's not my intent. My intent is to grow by investigating things, okay? And if you never investigate, and you can't really grow psychologically or academically or intellectually, so, how do you, for the sort of, let's say for the West positive to sort of, to pinch a term off, the NWG going free, all these people, to say, I'm all on board with West positive. That's fantastic. To say that, how, what do we say? How you see something that's right under your nose. Maybe that's what I'm saying, but not with the adequate tools of. So there's a question for you with say the West or Western philosophy. Does it need, like in the way that the East Eastern philosophy is very advanced and very special and very good at, in my opinion, the internal studies. Does the West need a to begin a new lesson, and the new lesson is Western internal studies, a brand new subject on this, right? And there you go. That's interesting. But and again, Alan Watts talks about Westerners adopting Eastern philosophy with as a sort of warning of the dangers, and then quoting Jung along the way, and that is a sort of a 25 to 30-minute video, something like that. It was a very interesting video on YT. If you look up about Westerners and Eastern philosophy, Alan Watts, and again the dangers of Westerners taking up Eastern philosophy, or the dangers of the average Westerner, I'm not quite sure. I think, again, in my opinion, I'm such an outlier because of not just because of the twice exceptional and the neurodiversity, whatever we want to call it. I'm not trying to say poor me or anything, I'm just saying because of the way that is, because I'm such an extreme outlier, that maybe that's the attraction I have to Eastern philosophy, as well as seeing it as more organic and more authentic, because the most of the Western is quite rigid, again, in my opinion. Maybe because, again, of Christianity, or I don't know, but yeah. So again, a new subject, Western internal study, right? Brand new subject, a brand new sphere of inquiry, as we say, right? But again, these things, like these Western style street lamps, or on the, again, in that film Jurassic World 2, I think it's 2, at the end with the mansion house, the very Western style architecture with the, again, people say that's not North European itself. I'm not really interested. I mean, it's probably neoclassical, again, if it's 1700s, so it's probably not either or. It's probably a hybrid of North and South Europe. But again, I'm not a PhD in civilization studies, so I really don't know. These are my ponderings, okay? But yes, the North-South thing and the barbarian versus South European civilization, these are all things that have been brought up by people in the what would be deemed, some people would call the West sympathetic individuals. Some of them have brought that point up quite a few times, right? And that's, again, a debate for another time. Yes, it's an interesting point, and it's a valid point, about, the North European so-called barbarians, were they Western versus Greco-Roman and all this stuff, and that, and then did the North Europeans hijack it, and the so-called white thing is like, well, that was North Europe, that was never the lineage of South, so the North, got a misidentity crisis or whatever. I get all those points, but again, it's not for this. It's not for this. This is purely about a Western blind spot, and using this Western style sword, Western style blade, as a metaphor for Western blind spots, and why you don't notice, why, again, it's a very, in Philadelphia, for example, for the NWG people, or West Positive people, why this very specific, and maybe someone extreme, so-called left-leaning wouldn't recognise, but why this very specific sort of, you got this sort of innate emotional feeling, that in the back of your psyche or subconscious, like, well, obviously that's that building, it makes sense, it's, that sort of thing, that sort of subconscious hieroglyph in your mind, right? Hieroglyphic, like pictorial concept, pre-language concept, right? Why is, again, and Philadelphia looks like, I mean, you could say Liverpool, but there's certainly the red brick, and why what's the word? Yes, why it's hard to see the Western blind spot, but why it's so, and maybe that taking it for granted is part of the Western blind spot of saying, well, it's no question that that's a Western style, in Philadelphia, or any equivalent like New York or Boston or anywhere, right? With the, say, the library and the roof paintings and the beautiful sort of this kind of stuff, why is that such a specifically so-called Western style, and then we go into, well, is Western just code word for Europe? To a degree, yes and no. Does it mean Western Europe and its offshoots? In its strict definition, it does, but not in its broader definition, no, because Austria and Germany are part of the so-called West, and they're in Central Europe, they're not in Western Europe. So, and to a degree, Slovenia, Slovakia, Czech Republic, all these things, right? They're not in, people like Poland, they constantly go about Poland, Czech Republic, Eastern Europe. They're not Eastern Europe, Central Europe. So people get confused there, but again, it means what the so-called West or Western. Yes, in a broader term, yes, it means Europe. Really, if we're doing the way it's used now, it's so dilute and so hybridized that it kind of has lost 80% to 90% of its meaning. And yes, it kind of means Europe and people of European descent, which they'll have to kind of pick up on, when they go, you don't mean West, you mean blah blah blah, right? Fine, whatever. Which is fine because it, again, the term the Western is so hybridized and watered down, diluted down, that it's lost 80% to 90% of its meaning, minimum percentage, if not 99.9%. And new terms needed, like if some people want to put forth a term Western kind, that's fine. Although to me, it does not mean every single Westerner or every single person of European descent. It means someone with a Western spirit, Western soul. You cannot just have a body or a skin, externally and say, oh, I'm this. It's like, no, you've got to do things to help people, you've got to try and be a positive, impact and give back. If you are, extremely wealthy or whatever, or your, IQ or whatever your gift is, you can't just say, well, I'm just going to sit on these resources and hoard them and I'm still Western kind. It's like, no, for my definition of Western kind, you don't just have a Western, nationality externally. You have a Western soul or spirit, and you do things to help the community. A Western just external exterior means absolutely nothing on its own, in my opinion. So my definition of Western kind is the soul spirit plus the external. You need them, all components, right? You can't just have the external by itself. It means nothing. It's again, in my opinion, it's not. There needs to be that pure spirit kind of thing of helping and aiding the community and things, right? In my opinion, so that that is my definition of WK. Okay, but it's all conjecture, it's all theories. Again, I don't have any sort of master's degree in, human studies or society studies or civilizational studies. Okay, I don't have a master's degree. I don't know. I'm not an expert. These are all theories and ideas. The basic point that I want to end up with in this video, okay, is turning into a very sort of Western/Eastern philosophy. For the last couple of minutes here, let's bring it back to the main sort of bullet point, the very raw main bullet point here, which is this is not a thing on its own, but a wider concept. Again, any American or North American people that aren't familiar with, that've never been to England, if you look up on images, internet images, can find the flag. And again, it has that very iconic style, recognizable Western style to anyone, to non-martial artists, to non-HEMA people, to non-people that don't practice WMA, to the layman's terms, and why it's so subconsciously, knee-jerk reaction, like, oh, obviously that's a Western style sword, or blade, and why is that, again, subconscious hieroglyph pictogram in the mind, why is that so powerful? And again, coming back to that, and how the armor and the things are Western, and how you can see a bit like an external martial art like karate or or Shaolin, how you can appreciate the internal elements of an external system, right? Like a martial arts analogy, but apply it to Western culture, or apply it to TWC, traditional Western culture. You can appreciate, even if it's more plain, and again might be the Christian influence. I wouldn't be surprised. Although I think that's a kind of a half truth, to be honest with you. But there's some percentage of it that's true. But although there is very intricate lacework on like wheel locks from the 1500s and flintlocks, so that's a kind of neo-pagan kind of thing. Yeah, try and look for infinitely, like a magnifying glass or something, with jewelry. How infinitely, what's the word? How you can see the internal within the external. How you can look at your own sort of culture and appreciate that there's a sort of mystical internal element that's almost near impossible to spot, but can actually be spotted. Yeah. Might go up to 33. So yeah, that's just to wrap up Western blind spots and how iconic, how you can appreciate the internal, what's the word, mystical. So it might be just for anyone who does karate understands, there's the higher level you go, there's more like a Tai Chi element, an internal Neiji art and Waji art, external martial art and internal martial art, right? There's an internal soft style and hard style, like the Tai Chi circle, the black and white yin yang diagram. How there's a hard systems go from hard to soft, and soft systems go from soft to hard, like Tai Chi versus karate, right? But in the end, the two halves of the circle balanced. Yes, so if we take so-called West as a metaphor for external Eastern, thought, Eastern thought or Eastern philosophy as then how we can say, again, Eastern thought is internal and Western is external, but how to see the internal within the external. Yeah. Or again, like karate versus Tai Chi, how to, compared to, not versus, compared to, how to, you go from external hard to internal soft, right? It's the direction. It's not the two halves that are the problem. It's the direction, and it's balanced in the end. It's just the direction that makes a difference, right? Could do a part 2 on this, but it's about Western TWC and Western